Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. There's a certain comfort in the predictability of a routine, a quiet assurance in knowing what each day holds. For years, I had believed in that safety net. Claire and I had built a life layered with shared memories and commitments, weddings, mortgages, holidays marked by laughter and snapshots pasted into albums that now felt like artifacts of a lie. But suspicion, once seated, has a way of worming into the cracks of even the most seamless facade. It started subtly, with the smallest change, Claire's eyes. Once warm and attentive, they had taken on a distant quality, as if she were watching something unfold far away. Her laugh seemed a touch too bright, her smile stretched thin at the corners, an actor's well-practiced expression. I told myself it was the stress of her job at the marketing firm, the endless meetings and important conferences that had begun to populate her calendar like an invasion. It was on a typical Thursday morning, one of those clear, brisk days that make you feel as if the world is polishing itself up for show, that the first real sign appeared. We were caught in our usual dance of getting ready. She rummaged for keys and notes, I brewed the coffee, half listening to the local news as it prattled on in the background. I watched her move around the kitchen, her hair pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail, her eyes fixed somewhere just above my shoulder. "I'm flying out to Orlando next week," she mentioned, as if it were nothing. I nodded, focusing on pouring the hot liquid without spilling it over the mug's rim. She mentioned Orlando often enough. It was one of those hubs for business conferences, full of industry leaders patting themselves on the back. But something about the way she avoided my gaze tickled a nerve in me. "That's the third trip this month, isn't it?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. Her fingers paused momentarily over her phone, only to resume their frenetic scrolling. "Is it?" she replied absently. "It's all part of the end-of-quarter push." I nodded again, the tightness in my chest warning me not to pursue the line of questioning. I didn't have the energy to pry open a conversation she'd expertly shut. I went back to sipping my coffee, letting the warmth distract me from the chill spreading through my veins. The moment passed, smoothed over by the daily grind. But that night, as Claire packed a suitcase with the precision of someone far too practiced, the tightness returned. I stood at the bedroom door, watching her fold blouses and slot toiletries into small pockets, each item disappearing with a soft, practiced snap. There were souvenirs on the vanity, a keychain shaped like a little dolphin, a postcard with a glossy beach sunset. Tokens of places she'd been, or at least claimed to have been. I turned away before she caught me staring. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the shallow rhythm of Claire's breathing, feeling the cool distance that had settled between us. I wanted to reach out, to touch her shoulder and pull her back into the sphere of trust we'd once shared, but I couldn't. Pride, fear, and the whisper of doubt pinned me to the mattress. The days trickled by in a haze of overcast skies and quiet dinners, her departure looming like a storm. The morning she left, she kissed me lightly, a routine peck on the lips that might as well have been a formality. "See you Sunday night," she said. The door clicked shut, and with it, the final note of normalcy faded. The day passed slowly, each hour marked by the droning hum of traffic outside and the periodic buzz of my phone. I tried to lose myself in work emails and house chores, anything to keep my mind from spiraling into the dark recesses of speculation. But when Claire's phone pinged from its spot on the dining room table, a careless oversight that seemed out of character, it caught my attention like a beacon. The screen lit up with a notification, "Jeremy, can't wait to see you. Same place." The words glowed in the dim light of the room, branding themselves into my brain. My breath caught, and a shiver traced down my spine. I wasn't sure whether I was more shocked by the message itself or by the realization that my fears were not just figments of my imagination. The world shifted subtly around me as I stared at her phone, still buzzing quietly before it dimmed back into silence. I resisted the urge to pick it up, to scroll and hunt for more evidence like a scavenger driven by hunger. I took a step back, running a hand through my hair and trying to remember how to breathe. This was no longer about mere suspicion. It was confirmation, even if just a sliver. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, pacing the house like a restless spirit. When night fell, the loneliness of the empty space wrapped around me, suffocating. The souvenirs on the vanity stood like silent witnesses, mocking me with their painted cheerfulness. I ran my finger over the edge of the postcard, its glossy surface cool beneath my touch. She said Orlando, I whispered to no one, the room swallowing the words. My mind wandered to the photos Claire had posted over the years, the filtered snapshots of conference halls, name tags, drinks in hand with colleagues I barely recognized. All perfectly curated to feed into the story she'd spun. I wondered if Jeremy was in those photos too, lurking just outside the frame. By the time I slid into bed, exhaustion and anger mingled, a cocktail of emotions I was unprepared to handle. The sheets felt colder without her beside me, and I spent the night tossing, haunted by her laughter, the way she had smiled at me when we first met, how I'd thought that smile was meant for me alone. Sunday came with heavy clouds and the cloying scent of impending rain. When Claire walked through the door that evening, her smile was wide, too wide, and she set down her suitcase with a thud. "Miss me?" she asked, the question hanging between us like a dare. I tried to smile, but my jaw felt locked. Always. The days after Claire's return felt like a masquerade ball, both of us moving through the house as if choreographed, avoiding certain topics, treading carefully around the jagged edges of what I now knew. I watched her from across rooms, the way she laughed a little too freely when the phone rang, the casual glances at her messages, each ding triggering a dull throb in my chest. The name Jeremy had become a ghost, whispering in every creak of the floor and rustle of papers. Claire seemed unbothered, if not a touch brighter than before. She peppered conversations with stories from her conference, weaving in details about speakers and networking events with the practiced ease of a seasoned storyteller. I nodded along, my responses automatic, my mind elsewhere, locked on the memory of her phone lighting up with that brief, damning text. The following weekend, we were invited to a dinner party at our friend Lisa's house. It was meant to be a gathering of familiar faces, laughter, and the easy comfort of shared history. Claire dressed with more care than usual, slipping into a midnight blue dress that hugged her frame. I watched her apply her makeup, the soft sweep of eyeliner, the lipstick that made her smile look both inviting and aloof. "Does this look okay?" she asked, turning to me with a grin that didn't reach her eyes. I forced a smile, the muscles in my jaw straining. "You look great," I said, and it was true. Claire was beautiful, even in this new role she'd taken on, even as the distance between us yawned like a canyon. At the party, the room buzzed with chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the rich scent of homemade lasagna. Lisa was in her element, ushering people in with the warmth of a practiced host. I found a spot by the window, half listening to a conversation about work policies, my eyes drifting to Claire across the room. She was surrounded by a cluster of people, laughing at something a man said, her hand grazing his arm. My stomach twisted. "Richard, you look like you're a million miles away," Lisa said, appearing at my side with a glass of wine. I blinked, summoning a tight smile. "Just thinking about work. You know how it is." She chuckled. "Don't I ever? You should take a break from all that thinking, though. Enjoy tonight." I nodded, taking a sip of the wine that suddenly tasted bitter. I wanted to take her advice, to sink into the evening and let it wash away the nagging sense of unease that had taken up permanent residence in my chest. But Claire's laugh rang out again, sharp and carefree, slicing through my thoughts. The rest of the evening was a blur of small talk, forced smiles, and pretending not to notice the way Claire's gaze flicked to her phone when it vibrated. By the time we left, my patience was worn thin, unraveling thread by thread. We walked to the car in silence, the night air cool and crisp, tinged with the scent of pine. Claire's heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement, a metronome counting down to something inevitable. "Fun night," she said, breaking the silence as I started the engine. Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, they softened. It was enough to make me hesitate, my anger faltering. But then she looked away, distracted by another notification on her phone, and the moment passed. "Yeah, a lot of fun," I said, the sarcasm slipping out before I could rein it in. Claire's brows knitted, but she said nothing. The rest of the drive was tense, the hum of the road the only sound between us. When we got home, she went straight to the bathroom, the door clicking shut behind her. I stood in the hallway, staring at the dark sliver of space beneath the door, listening to the faint rush of water from the tap. My pulse drummed in my ears, a quiet fury building as I pieced together what to do next. Enough of waiting. Enough of pretending. I grabbed my laptop from the living room and sat at the kitchen table, the glow of the screen casting sharp shadows across my face. My fingers hovered over the keys, hesitating for a fraction of a second before typing "reverse phone lookup" into the search bar. It felt underhanded, a violation of trust, but trust had already been shattered. The first search revealed nothing, a dead end that only fueled my frustration. But then I remembered the phone bill, detailed records of every call, every number. I had access. The online portal opened easily, the login as familiar as breathing. I scrolled through the lists of calls, my eyes scanning for anything that didn't belong. The Virginia area code appeared over and over, tucked among routine calls to her office and my own number. Jeremy. I leaned back in the chair, the weight of the confirmation settling over me. The sound of the bathroom door opening snapped me out of my trance. Claire stepped into the kitchen, her hair pulled back, face clean of makeup, looking almost like the girl I'd met over a decade ago. But the illusion was brief, punctured by the flash of her phone lighting up with another text, the name Jeremy searing itself into the silence between us. "What are you doing up?" she asked, her voice light but strained. "Couldn't sleep," I said, shutting the laptop before she could glimpse what was on the screen. She nodded, a flicker of something passing through her eyes, worry, maybe, or guilt. "Well, don't stay up too late. You need your rest." I watched her walk away, the sound of her footsteps fading as she climbed the stairs. I sat there in the kitchen, surrounded by the echoes of our life, feeling the certainty of what needed to come next solidify within me. The days that followed felt surreal, like walking through a dream where reality was painted with uneven strokes, the edges blurring and shifting. I went through the motions at work, answering emails and sitting in meetings where everyone's voices were muffled, background noise to the turmoil brewing inside me. At home, Claire moved with the same grace, the same careful calm, but now every gesture, every glance, every word seemed suspect, laden with hidden meanings. I knew I couldn't keep coasting in the shadows of half-truths. The Virginia number, Jeremy's name on the phone bill, the way her eyes darted to her phone with a spark she tried to conceal, it all pointed to a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face head-on. But fear had never been my master. Determination, however, was. One evening, I waited for Claire to head out to her gym class. She left with the usual peck on the cheek, a breezy, "Don't wait up." I nodded absently, my mind already 3 steps ahead. I watched from the window as her taillights disappeared down the street before pulling out the phone I'd retrieved from the spare room drawer earlier. Her old phone. The one she'd claimed was wiped clean before getting a newer model. The battery still had some charge, and a rush of relief swept through me when it lit up with a simple swipe. The password, an old anniversary date, worked. I stared at the home screen, a familiar yet distant picture of us smiling at some long-forgotten beach. My chest tightened, but I pushed the feeling away and dove into the messages. Scrolling felt like peeling back layers of our life, each older notification a deeper cut. Some were routine, messages from coworkers and family. But then, as I scrolled further, I found the texts from a number saved only as J. They began innocuously, work discussions or vague mentions of meetings. But the tone shifted, words slipping into the intimate, conversations laced with subtle innuendos and shared memories I hadn't been part of. Jay, I still can't get last weekend out of my head. You make everything brighter. My hand shook as I read and reread the message. There it was, clear as day, a confession hiding in plain sight. A rage unlike anything I'd known coursed through me, dark and hot. My instinct was to hurl the phone, to let it smash against the wall, shattering like my illusion of our life. But I held back. This wasn't just about feeling betrayed. It was about what I would do next. I needed a plan, something more than a confrontation that would end in shouted denials and crocodile tears. It had to be undeniable, orchestrated, leaving her nowhere to run, no excuse to grasp. I spent the next 2 days gathering every piece of evidence I could. Calls to mutual friends confirmed her work conferences were often punctuated by social outings she hadn't mentioned. A friend who worked at a hotel near where Claire said she stayed came up empty when I asked if her name had shown up in their guest list. The emails she drafted, carefully stored in her sent folder, shared plans with Jeremy that she would later relay as anecdotes to me, only stripped of their core truths. The night before I planned to confront her, she returned home late. I watched her enter the house, a slight, almost guilty tilt to her shoulders. She placed her purse on the counter and glanced at me with that practiced smile, an echo of the woman I once trusted completely. "Tough day?" she asked, her voice holding a lilt that seemed out of place. Maybe she sensed the storm gathering in me, the subtle shift in my demeanor over the past week. "Yeah, you could say that," I replied, my tone carefully measured. She hesitated, the smile slipping as she noticed the hard line of my mouth, the stillness in the room. "Is something wrong, Richard?" I met her eyes, and for a moment, the room was silent but for the tick of the clock, each second drawing us closer to a breaking point. "Claire," I said, keeping my voice calm, "we need to talk." Her expression faltered, the practiced poise giving way to a flicker of something raw, fear or maybe realization. She nodded, taking a seat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared meals and stories, oblivious to the weight it now bore. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight. I took a breath, steadying myself. "I know about Jeremy. I know what's been happening during your so-called conferences." Her eyes widened, and a flush crept up her neck. I watched her struggle to gather herself, but her mouth opened and closed like she couldn't quite find the right words. "Richard, it's not what you think." The old refrain. I almost laughed at how rehearsed it sounded. "Don't," I interrupted, leaning forward. "Don't insult me with that. I have everything, texts, the phone bill, confirmations that you weren't where you said you were." I paused, watching the color drain from her face as the realization sunk in that she was cornered. Her fingers twisted in her lap, eyes welling with tears she tried to blink away. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "It just happened." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me. "Things like this don't just happen, Claire. You made a choice, over and over." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, she didn't try to deny or twist the story. She just sat there, looking small, as if the weight of her actions had finally settled on her shoulders. "What now?" she asked, the words barely audible. I stared at her, the woman I had built a life with, now a stranger in every way that mattered. Now, we figure out how to end this mess with as little damage as possible. For both of us." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. And just like that, the script of our life flipped. The next few days passed in a strange, suffocating silence. We moved through the house as if it were a fragile glass shell, our words sparse, carefully chosen. Claire slept in the guest room, and I found myself waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of quiet footsteps or the murmur of her sobs. Each sound pulled at something deep within me, a blend of anger, sorrow, and the ache of losing something I once believed was unbreakable. I took time off work, unable to face the mundane when my world was unraveling. Mornings were the hardest. The sunlight filtering through the kitchen blinds, highlighting the empty chair across from mine, seemed cruel. I stared at it, a monument to the void that had grown between us. Claire's gaze, when we crossed paths, was empty, her blue eyes hollow as if looking through me. "Richard," she finally said one morning, breaking the silence that had grown too thick to bear. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed, the tension in her shoulders visible even beneath her old sweatshirt. "Can we talk, please?" I looked up, the ache in my chest making it hard to breathe. "What's there left to say, Claire?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I need to tell you the truth. All of it." I nodded slowly, the weight of that promise hanging in the air between us. We sat at the kitchen table, its familiar surface now a battleground of unspoken words. Claire took a shaky breath, fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "It wasn't just Jeremy," she began, her voice a thread, barely holding. "I mean, he was the start, but it wasn't just him." She looked up, meeting my gaze with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "There were others, Richard. I wanted more, something different from the life we had. It was never about you not being enough. It was about me needing to feel alive." The words cut deeper than anything I'd imagined. Each syllable sank into my skin, drawing blood. I stared at her, trying to process the scope of her confession, the betrayal not just of one moment or one lie, but of years, of layers I hadn't even known existed. The life I'd fought to protect and preserve had never been whole. It was built on a foundation cracked from the start. "I wanted to hate you," I finally said, my voice trembling. "I wanted to yell, to throw everything you did back in your face. But now," I shook my head, unable to finish. What was there to say when the damage was so absolute? Claire reached out, her fingers brushing mine before I could pull away. "I'm so sorry, Richard," she whispered. "I never meant for this to be our story." But it was, and there was no undoing it. The next day, we started discussing the practicalities, splitting accounts, who would stay in the house, the logistics of separating a life woven tightly together. It was mechanical, businesslike, but every now and then, one of us would falter, eyes damp and voice catching on the edge of a sob. It was late in the evening when my phone buzzed, pulling me out of my daze. It was Lisa, our friend from the dinner party. Her voice was panicked, breaking into uneven words. "Richard, you need to come to the hospital. It's Claire." The room spun as I tried to make sense of the words. "What happened?" I managed, already grabbing my keys. "I don't know all the details." She collapsed at work. "Just please, hurry." The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and honking cars. By the time I arrived, the sterile white of the hospital lobby was too bright, too cold. A nurse led me to a room, the hallway stretching endlessly until I reached the door. Inside, Claire lay on a bed, her skin pale, eyes closed as a monitor beeped steadily beside her. Lisa stood at the edge of the room, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "They said it was a heart condition," she whispered. Something she never told anyone about. I approached the bed slowly, the world narrowing to the sound of that monotonous beep and the fragile rise and fall of her chest. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me with a weak, apologetic smile. "Hey," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I sat down, the chair creaking beneath me. "Hey," I replied, my throat too tight to say more. "I'm sorry," she said again, tears slipping down her face. "I was scared, Richard. Of everything. Even this." "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "But why didn't you tell me? Any of it?" Her gaze fell, and for a moment, the room was silent but for the beeping, each sound marking the space between heartbeats. "Because I didn't want you to look at me like that, like you're looking at me now. Like you see me for all the broken pieces." I reached out, my hand covering hers, cold and frail. "I loved you, Claire. Even when I shouldn't have." The room fell quiet again, the weight of our lost years pressing down like an anchor. Her breathing grew shallower, the beeping on the monitor speeding up before slowing, erratic. The nurse rushed in, followed by a doctor, pushing me gently aside. I stood there, helpless, as the sounds of urgency filled the room. Voices barked commands I couldn't understand, and all I could do was watch as Claire's chest stilled, the monitor emitting a long, flat tone that seemed to echo forever. Lisa's sobs were muffled by her hand, and the nurse murmured something soft, an apology or a condolence. I didn't hear it. I just stared at Claire, the woman I had once known, now a stranger, now gone. The last chapter of our life together closed not with fury or forgiveness, but with silence, the kind that leaves a hollow too deep to fill. Outside, the night stretched out, indifferent and vast, as I walked to the car alone. The road home was dark, the world unchanged, except for me, except for everything.